bite of the apple here. So we had the split decision, the judge in New York, the judge in Washington. Well, there's another case coming up. It's called First Unitarian Church of Los Angeles versus NSA. And I actually have played a little role in this case myself. And it's brought by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Again, it's a case that focuses on the legality of the metadata and so forth. But there's another little twist, and they're also focusing on another issue, which I think is very important, and that's the Americans' right of assembly. And the government shouldn't have a right to know every time the Committee for the Republic is meeting here, to get all our phone calls and find out that we're having a meeting, or the NAACP, or any political gatherings or anti-war gatherings. So that's one of the other aspects of this case. It makes it a little bit different from the other two. And it should be decided hopefully in the relatively near future. So you have these three cases, and then they'll go to the appeals court, and then they'll go to the Supreme Court for decision. So we're just at the sort of entry position here, but I really do have to, next time I see Judge Leon, I really do have to, for the first time, say he was right. And I'm glad that he was right on this issue here. So what I did was I wrote an amicus, or I actually helped. I taught at Berkeley at one point, and the law students at Berkeley wanted me to help them do an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, for that case. The third case is going to be coming up. And what we focused on largely was looking back to the Church Committee, for example, of 1975, the Church Committee. And we could show that, look, before the Church Committee, NSA was just running amok. I mean, they had this Operation Shamrock, which was eavesdropping on everybody's telegram coming in, going out, going through the country, millions and millions of telegrams a day and all that. Operation Minaret, eavesdropping and anti-war protesters. It was only when the Church Committee came along and made it transparent, publicized it through their hearings and through their reports, that there was change made, and that was the creation of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the first court to ever put any kind of a leash or any kind of regulation on NSA. And it worked really good for 30 years. I mean, it wasn't perfect. They never turned the government down, but at least it was there. And it did make some, I think it was, I used to make jokes about it, but I think it actually did do a fair amount of good work, and certainly better than not being there. So what happened after 9/11, the Bush administration went around the FISA court, violated the law, and just bypassed the FISA court. And then 2.5 years later or so, after the New York Times revealed the program, then they created this thing called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Amendments Act, which basically just legalized what they were doing in the first place. Now we're at the point where we were at, just prior to the Church Committee, where the NSA has run amok, and we need another Church Committee to look at this. I mean, I admire the President's panel because they actually came up with some really good suggestions, but it was just a panel that looked at some of the issues for a month or a couple months or whatever it was, and that's it, and then they're gone. So I think what we really need is a Church Committee to do this. I mean, it's been since 1975. Look at the technology NSA has picked up. Look at the amount of weaknesses that they've created in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And then I was down in Rio back in November, and I saw Glenn Greenwald while I was there, and he showed me one of the documents that he had. And I thought it was very fascinating. This one here was this is just an excerpt from it, but I've got another slide that actually you could actually read. It tells a little bit about what it was. But when I read that, I thought, wow, we're here. We finally arrived at the point we were in 1975 when the government was doing a lot of really bad things. Back then what they were doing was they were looking for ways to get Martin Luther King, who was considered a radical at the time, and they wanted to discredit him in front of his followers. And one way of doing that was by finding out what kind of sexual activity he might have, and then using that to either blackmail him, to extort him, or basically just discredit him in front of his followers. And that's what this document was. I mean, it basically said the same thing. It was dated just back in October of 2012, and what it argued was that, and the director of the NSA, General Alexander's title was at the very top of it, and it said they look for personal vulnerability. They're looking for personal vulnerabilities, viewing sexually explicit material online, and so forth. A lot can be learned by people visiting porn sites. Besides, it's probably more fun to listen to the North Koreans. So then the idea here is to exploit. I was amazed at the language they use. You know, like nobody would ever see this document, so let's use as vivid language as possible. So then they would exploit these vulnerabilities of character, these radicalizers. And again, they said, we're not talking about terrorists here. We're not talking about criminals. These are people who are radical. It actually identified the people. I saw the original document when I was down there with Glenn, so I actually saw the names, but I was, you know, I agreed with him that you shouldn't publicize it. But when I saw the names, there wasn't any division between, because some of the, at least one of the names I saw was a U.S. citizen, or a U.S. person is what they call it, and others were foreigners. So there wasn't any division. We're only going after the foreigners. It's Americans or U.S. persons and foreigners. And then, you know, it was interesting to me, among the distribution list was the Justice Department and Commerce. I mean, what, is this because they're trying to regulate the porn industry or something? I didn't get what the Commerce Department would be getting a top secret document from NSA about eavesdropping on people's visits to porn sites, but there's a lot I don't understand about NSA. So going back, this is what happened back in the bad old days, the 1960s. The FBI used wiretapping to discover vulnerabilities such as sexual activity to neutralize or target such as radicalizers. They include radicalizers such as Martin Luther King. Back then, the idea had come up with J. Edgar Hoover, the longer-serving FBI director. Now comes from General Alexander, the longest-serving NSA director. It says something about not letting people stay in a job too long. And NSA played a role back in those days, too. It played a role as part of Minaret, eavesdropping on anti-war protesters and so forth. So NSA would pick up the information, some of the information, and pass it on to the FBI. So in terms of reforms now, you know, those are, I couldn't see anything that I really disagree with on those 46 recommendations that came out from the White House panel. I'm, you know, hearing all these rumors that the president's not going to, he's going to do sort of cosmetic changes tomorrow, not anything really substantive, which would be very disappointing, but actually it goes along with his track record. I mean, he's the guy that tripled the number of people tripled the number of forces in Iraq instead of ending it in the first 6 months. I'm sorry, in Afghanistan. Tripled the number of forces in Afghanistan when he first got into office instead of ending it in the first 6 months. George Bush had one drone attack in Yemen in 8 years. And Obama has declared war on Yemen. I mean, there's drone attacks going on all the time. And the first attack on Yemen wasn't even a drone attack. It was in, I think it's December 17th, 2009. That was when he launched his first attack on Yemen, which was very telling. There weren't enough drones in the area. They were all in Afghanistan and Pakistan. But there was a Navy ship. It was either a Navy guided missile cruiser or it was a submarine, one of the two. He used that. And they thought that there were some terrorists down in the really rural part of southern Yemen. So they fired all these cruise missiles at this group in this tiny little village. the cruise missiles happened to be filled with cluster bombs, outlawed in 109 countries. I mean, this is the person I voted for president. I mean, really. Shooting cluster bombs, or rather, shooting cruise missiles with cluster bombs at a country we're not at war with, and then missing the target and killing 50 women and children. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, he made a very public phone call to the president of Yemen, thanking him for such a great terrorist operation that he performed, when the president of Yemen, Salih, had nothing to do with it. It was entirely the Obama administration, but Salih had agreed to go along with it. Which gets me kind of to the point I'm making, the point I want to make. We find out a lot of these things, not from the U.S. government, but from whistleblowers. A lot of this came from the material that was leaked by Manning, Chelsea Manning. So what happened was, among the documents he released was a meeting between Petraeus and the president of Yemen, Salih. And at that meeting, which took place a couple months after that attack, and after that attack there were more, there was one on Christmas Eve and other attacks in Yemen. And in that meeting there was a transcript that was leaked by the Manning documents. And it said they were laughing about it in the meeting, and the president of Yemen said, yeah, I'll keep lying about it. And matter of fact, I'm even lying to my own parliament about it. And so Petraeus and Salih had a good laugh about that. So these are the reasons why I really admire whistleblowers, because they tell us the things that we really have to know, rather than the things they want us to know. One of the things that I thought was really fascinating, since I knew a number of people at the church committee, was they were able to get NSA to come up and name a lot of the people that were targets of their eavesdropping, the anti-war protesters and so forth. There were 1,600 of them. And they actually came out with names, real fearsome people like Dr. Benjamin Spock, Joan Baez, Jane Fonda, people you really have to worry about. Well, there was one name, there were actually a couple names, but one name in particular that they refused to release to the church committee. Despite all the pleading, they never released this one name to the church committee. But that name was finally released. I think it was last September it was released. And here's who it was. Which is why we need another church committee. Anyway, thanks very much.